we don't know if there will be a future where America has a Voting Rights Act.
It's the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act being signed into law, and we need it now more than ever.
We like to think that after 1965, voting rights were all but assured.
But what we know and what we've seen time and time again is that every single time that Native Americans flex their political power, the boot comes down on the neck of Native Americans. So whether that be when they elect a candidate, or when they demand a seat at the table, or when they swing an election, every single time, forces come out to make it harder to vote, to limit the hours or days or the means of registration. Over and over again, what we see is the cutting out of Native voters from the electorate. And that's because Native American voters are powerful. That's because lots of voters of color are powerful. And people are fearful of the change that their perspective may bring.
I was one of those people who thought that voting didn't matter. That was just the reservation thing, that our voice doesn't matter. Well, geez, our voice must matter if they're trying to silence it so bad.
The Eighth Circuit has gutted the Voting Rights Act. It said that individuals can't bring cases under the Voting Rights Act, and that only the Department of Justice can bring those cases.
How do they erase what happened? How do they take that away from my people who voted me in? Which is pretty much what it feels like this Eighth Circuit decision is doing.
The thing about discrimination is that it's not new, and it's very predictable. This post-truth, post-fact world where people can simply assert that discrimination no longer exists. Unfortunately, we know that discrimination is incredibly active in Native communities. We know that Native Americans are discriminated against across this country. We've seen that racism firsthand, especially when they're trying to get to the ballot box.
You're wondering why other people aren't so mad? We were here before North Dakota was even a state. It's like one battle after another. That's why it's so important for us to have these people to educate us, to let us know how important it is.
And so what we've seen over the course of especially the last decade is a real acceleration on the attack on the Voting Rights Act itself. And I think that it can't be overstated that this moment is intentional and crafted over time. And the reason that we know that it's intentional and crafted is because we see the footprints of these attempts to pull back voting rights, whether that be in Shelby County v. Holder, that gutted the pre-clearance provisions of abusing states, whether that be Brnovich v. DNC, which is a case that made it harder to bring vote denial claims, and now in the Eighth Circuit with Turtle Mountain v. Howe, we see that the courts are restricting the ability for voters to have their fundamental right to vote protected through the Voting Rights Act. And so the ultimate outcome that this logic flows, right? That if you don't believe that every voter should have the ability to cast a ballot, or every voter's perspective is valuable, or every voter is entitled to participation, the enforcement of that participation is really inconvenient, or the enforcement of that participation is something that you'd want to prevent from happening. And that's what happens when you gut the Voting Rights Act. The consequence of gutting the Voting Rights Act, the consequence of a world in which individuals and private plaintiffs can't bring Voting Rights Act claims, is that bad actors, so a state that is not looking for change to the composition of its state legislature, whether that's a county that doesn't want to give up a county seat, a school board that doesn't want to change its curriculum, any of those people can institute a law or a rule that prevents and cuts out certain voters. In the past, they used literacy tests. In North Dakota, they used a proof of address requirement. You can craft laws to cut voters out. And what we'll see is people are going to craft these laws to cut voters out. Previously, you could bring a case under the Voting Rights Act to protect your rights. But that process is in danger. And if the Voting Rights Act falls, individuals are going to be cut out of the American system. And that's going to be by design.